Sanse, Anine, Boujou, and hello. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. The music you are hearing may be familiar. It's the theme song for one of the most popular shows ever on CBC TV, North of 60. From the moment it hit the small screen in 1992 to its end in 1998, plus 5 movies, the show set in Canada's North was a hit. It became must-watch television. Families gathered, phones went unanswered, band meetings unattended. Even the great community pastime of bingo was rescheduled.
I always wore the studded leather jacket with tight blue jeans. He was always causing some kind of disturbance.
The producers knew that they needed an Indigenous writer in the story department.
We had never even imagined that there would be a show that would have a dominant Native cast.
And not just in Indigenous communities, the show redefined how people saw Indigenous people. North of 60 launched the careers of actors like Tina Keeper and Dakota House, and writers like Jordan Wheeler and Richard Van Camp. It grew an industry from almost non-existent to hundreds of people who still create story today. As a young Deerchild just entering college in the big city, I remember that slow music that reminded me of my beloved northern community. And I recognized my own people in the faces of Michelle and Peter Kennedy. The community of Lynx River was not so far from the places that I knew. North of 60 was a piece of home, and its success an inspiration to my own aspirations to be a writer. December marks the 25th anniversary of this iconic show, and today on Radio Indigenous, we honor the voices that rose and danced like the Northern Lights.
Beautiful downtown Lynx River, Northwest Territories. 150 people, 33 dogs, a great-looking nurse, and a lousy motel.
These days, she's practically a household name. But back then, Tina Keeper wasn't even sure she wanted to act. North of 60 was her first major role in television. Tina played the lead character, Michelle Kennedy, an RCMP officer in her Dene community of Lynx River. She appeared in 85 of the 90 episodes and 5 movies. Tina was the first Indigenous person to lead a Canadian television drama, and she joins me now in the studio. Hey, cousin.
Hi, cousin. Oh, my goodness.
Welcome to Unreserved. Such a pleasure.
Such a pleasure. I'm so proud of your show.
Back to the point of our conversation here. When cousins collide.
When cousins collide, yes.
So tell me about Michelle Kennedy. Who was she?
She was a pretty tough cookie. She was a residential school survivor. She came from a very loving family, and that had been, torn apart. She also had wrestled with addictions, alcoholism, and I think that she was a very kind of, at one point in her life, very broken, and then just had glued herself together, and nothing was going to undo her. So she was very tough, and to a fault. So she was very serious. It's always funny because I think that she's a very tough, serious woman compared to myself. Like she's a lot tougher than me. She always was, and stronger, serious. She was going to make a difference for her community. And that's who she was. She was just, I always felt like she was just glued together, really, with super glue. Very, very, very resolute.
Yeah. What attracted you to the role of Michelle?
I'm going to go on a tangent here, but Jordan Wheeler, right? I mean, this
was one of the writers.
He was one of the writers. So this was in 1992, and I was still in university, finishing my first degree. And, we had never even imagined that there would be a show that would have a dominant Native cast. And there was no APTN yet. And this was sort of beyond what I could have ever imagined as an actress, I think. And so when I auditioned for the role, I honestly thought that I would maybe get a day on this new TV show and I could pay for my broken gasket in my car because it was going to cost $350. I remember it so well. When I got the call that I got the role, because remember, it's 92, we had no cell phones or anything. I phoned my mom from a payphone downtown, and I said, Mom, I got the call. I'm going to be a lead actor on a TV series on CBC. And she said, oh, that's nice. Do you want to come over for dinner?
Oh.
When I got the role, I just inhabited it. I felt like I knew who this woman was. I didn't have a lot of meetings with the producer, so, I was theater trained. I had never even been on a TV set before. So I, through my training, I just developed who she was, and she was somebody quite familiar. My family were residential school survivors. My family is from the north. And we had our South Slavey advisors, and they worked really closely with us. So I felt very confident about who, kind of putting this character together. I had assistance from the Dene people, and I also had my own, my own life and family's history informing that character.
Yeah. When you say, you knew this woman, I think a lot of people in Indigenous Canada say that. I know Michelle Kennedy. That's my sister. That's my cousin. That's my auntie.
Yes.
How much of that were you aware of when you inhabit Michelle?
I really modeled her personal experience on that of my family, my extended family, because, my mother was the first generation to go to residential school. And that was a similar, that's how I saw Michelle Kennedy's experience as well. Her and Peter were the first to go and to be removed from their community. So it was a break. They had relied upon their own culture, their own history, and then that was shattered. And that was my mom's experience. So, I didn't, not that I ever talked to my mom about it, but, I was very close to my aunties, both sides of my family. So I kind of knew, what that experience was. I knew also, too, who I was as an Indigenous person, from my family's life and love. And I kind of just translated that to Michelle. I also felt like she really represented that generation that came forward, with the resilience to make change. Like this was not, however these colonial structures impacted our day-to-day lives and our personal lives, they were not going to destroy us. It's definitely part of Michelle. It's part of who I, as an Indigenous, person, is really, to me, something that I feel is a blessing in my life.
Yeah.
It's really informs my life a lot.
Did it surprise you when, as you said, you thought this was going to be one role, you can fix your gasket in your car? Did it surprise you when that role became so central to North of 60 and people were so enamored and that character became so beloved in the community?
I know. Well, they really wrote, purely in Aristotelian, story structures speak, of archetypes. So she was the her nemesis was Albert. And, it's very clear, those are kind of like bookends for that show. And that we never went off of that, that structure. So we always kept it intact. So as much as I might have wanted, something to happen for Michelle, I was like, can she be blown up this year and maybe just come back next year for I always say that, to Barbara Samuels, who's one of the co-creators, that you created an Indigenous Anne Murray in that character. People, how people love Anne Murray, she's so Canadian. That's how people, I think, respond to Michelle Kennedy.
Michelle Kennedy, yeah.
And they love her, they trust her, and she definitely was an archetype. And but it was fun. It was really fun to play. It was very interesting to, be part of that project at that time.
And some of the storylines made a difference in Indigenous communities. Tell me about that.
One of the most interesting stories that I heard was a friend of mine who worked at a tribal council. She would schedule all the medevacs, and she was a Cree speaker in northern Manitoba here. And when one of our characters, Lois, decided to have her baby in the community, women wanted to have their babies in the community. They didn't want to travel out for the month. Mm-hmm. So even at that time, and I think even to some extent still, Indigenous communities, women do not have control over even the birth of their children. Mm-hmm. So, everything is controlled by government. It's so strange. So that I remember that story very well. Because we had advisors, that were part of the project for its entirety, our South Slavey advisors and the RCMP, we had that kind of connection, sort of to, what was happening in communities, what was happening for people in terms of their relationship to the RCMP.
Do you have a favorite memory from that time, whether it's an episode or, something that happened off air that you could share with us?
I remember shooting another scene one time, and it was a really tough episode. Michelle was going through this loss of her daughter, and I was just having a hard time because you shoot out of order, so you have to go in a pitch, right? So you go from not believing what you know is true, that maybe your daughter has maybe she's moved on into the spirit world, and then you find out, and so it's just all these beats, but you shoot them out of order, right? So it was tough to shoot it, and I remember just one day, it was the end of the day, we're losing the light, we've got to get the scene in, and it was one of those, it was just a note I had to hit, and I just felt like I couldn't hit it, and I was crawling on my hands and knees out of the scene, and I was I'm not an actor, what am I doing here? And then my director was walking alongside me on the ground, and she's no, Tina, you are an actor, I really think you can do this.
The moment they pulled Hannah out of the river, all I could think about was getting home. But here it's even worse.
How?
Everyone's so worried about me. But I think they're really worried about themselves. What'll they do if I'm not here?
They think of you as family. They love you.
Like children love their mothers because they're so helpless. I'm not a mother anymore. My child is dead.
Michelle.
I don't want to be their mother anymore. I want to go somewhere and just be a cop, and when my shift is over, that's it.
I think you did okay there, Tina. I think you did okay. Tina Keeper played the lead role of Michelle Kennedy in North of 60. She also served as a member of Parliament from 2006 to 2008. She is now a film and TV producer and continues to act. Coming up on Unreserved.
There was absolute silence in the room, and we all just looked at each other, and there was no question. She's it, she's it. We all felt very strongly there was no contest here.
We talked to the creator of North of 60, Barbara Samuels, in just a few minutes. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Rosanna Deerchild. North of 60 refers to the longitude line that separates southern Canada from the territories. Filmed in Bragg Creek, Alberta, just southwest of Calgary. Rumor has it some of the Lynx River set has been bought up by another CBC TV show, Heartland.
Hi, this is Dakota House. I play TV Tanya on North of 60. You're listening to Unreserved here on CBC, and I'm sitting with my favorite cousin, Rosanna Deerchild.
At the time, the creators of North of 60 had no idea that what they were making would become an iconic Canadian television show. For its first show on December 3rd, 1992, it had one of the highest debut audiences for a CBC TV drama ever. It went on to become the launching pad of many Indigenous actors and writers. Barbara Samuels, along with Wayne Grigsby, are the creators of North of 60. Barbara joins me now from Toronto. Hello and welcome to Unreserved.
Hey, Rosanna, thank you.
So tell me, how did you come up with the concept for North of 60?
Well, I guess self-interest in a way. We were being very selfish. We had just sort of started writing together on a TV series called ENG, and we were kind of tired of writing, white urban drama where everybody talked a lot and everything was sort of limited in a certain way in its idiom and its setting, that sort of thing. We were looking for a new landscape, and we were both very interested in the idea of looking north and just finding people who had not been on screen before, people whose stories in contemporary terms had not been told before. That was basically the motive. That was what spurred us to sort of, and we looked very far north of 60, and then we had to pull it down, and we started exploring the Northwest Territories and the pragmatic aspect of, where you could shoot, how you could shoot, all of those things entered into it. But that was the basic kickoff.
Were you concerned that at the time, not having a lot of modern Indigenous story on screens, big or small, that you would have problems, quote unquote, selling the concept?
The sale wasn't as much of an issue as the concern about whether the audience was there. But our big question was, all of us, actors, techies, producers, writers, we all reckoned we'd get a year and then people would wash their hands of us. Little did we know.
Indeed. It became pretty iconic, in fact. How did you settle on the story of Lynx River and the Dene people?
It was, again, an issue of what made sense to us dramatically, first of all, and what fascinated us about the territories was the fact, the kind of, people of European background tend to reckon that at the time, and we are talking 25 years ago, that most Indigenous communities, for people who didn't live in the cities, they lived on reserves. And what fascinated us about the territories was the fact that there was a reserve in Hay River, but basically the Indigenous population were in the majority there. The communities were Indigenous with a couple of, white folks who wandered in now and then or somehow found their lives in the north, and they were in the minority and they were the outsiders. And that idea of community that wasn't sort of, necessarily designated by a reserve was fascinating. And we wanted to invert the proportion, not sort of have representatives of a community scattered amongst people of European background. We wanted an Indigenous town where people lived according to their rules.
As a non-Indigenous person yourself, why did you feel you were best to tell this story?
We didn't. And it was, I guess it was a certain amount of, I will say, benign arrogance at the time, figuring, people's stories weren't being told and we were being given an opportunity to tell them, and it allowed us to explore terrains that we were ignorant of. And we tried, at the time, to bring voices into the story department, into the directing department, which would also push Indigenous talent into the mainstream. That was one of the, if you want, self-imposed mandates that we chose to follow, given the fact that we were non-Indigenous people telling Indigenous stories. We figured there had to be some kind of effort to balance this or to start the process of people coming into mainstream television.
You did something quite unique, and you touched on it a little bit, bringing in Indigenous story, bringing in people who knew the cultural references in the people. Tell me about that process. Was that difficult to do, and who were some of the people that you involved?
What was amazing is when we went up to the territories to kind of do what we call a recce. We assumed that these, white folks coming from down in Toronto or wherever we were coming from at the time would be looked upon as kind of peculiar, saying, "Hi there, guys, we're doing a TV series about your part of the world, and we'd like you to talk to us." And we were prepared sort of to get any kind of response, whether it be overt hostility or kind of, suspicion, or we didn't know what we'd be up against. And what we found just blew us away because there was openness and there was trust. And there were people who shared stories. There was a woman who has remained a friend of mine who I met in Fort Simpson, and she just decided she wanted to talk with me. We'd never met before in our lives, and she sat me down in the band office and she told me her story. And I just listened for about 2.5 hours and walked out of there overwhelmed. The core of that story ended up morphing into our principal character, Michelle Kennedy's tale of her life as a residential school survivor. And so you really did feel like you were being honored and trusted with a story, and that story had to be served. And I didn't know that when this woman told me her story.
Did you want to give some shout out of love to this inspiration of yours?
I don't know how she would feel about her name on the radio, but I will say it anyway because she has remained a friend and, in fact, just emailed me today. Her name is Tumba Norwegian, and she's an amazing lady, So what was the moment for you when you knew that this program, North of 60, was making a huge difference in how Indigenous people were being viewed in this country? We did a couple of focus groups in the first and second seasons, and were horrified at the way we saw it. And these, again, were groups of people. There were no Indigenous participants, but there were people of all ethnic, cultural, socioeconomic backgrounds in the group, as I recall. And there was a certain amount of cynicism from people after watching several episodes or a season. Like, what we were showing them was basically nonsense because they'd seen the way quote-unquote, Native people lived on the news. Mm-hmm. And the idea that a town could look like Lynx River, which was more or less based a little bit on Fort Liard, a gorgeous little town on the Mackenzie, that our production designer and we had visited, there was cynicism about that, because that wasn't what this person had seen on the news. There was a certain amount of that kind of kickback that we were somehow romanticizing or falsifying. That wasn't, I'm talking about one focus group, but I did hear that raised. What we saw over the period of time after the second season was that wonderful sort of metamorphosis had happened, which is what anybody doing a television show counts on, which is the proprietary nature of television characters. So these people went from being those people to a focus group, again, made up of non-Indigenous, ethnically mixed background, talking about our Michelle. Mm-hmm. And that suddenly, by the second season, Michelle belonged to the viewers. Peter belonged to the viewers. The town belonged to the viewers. And if you ask me what my big takeaway from the show was, that conventional television drama was actually a privilege that people of European background took for granted. We took for granted that we could turn on the television, either American, Canadian, British, whatever, at any point and see some reflection of our lives in drama, have some experience worked through in good drama, hopefully, but any drama, sitcoms, whatever. We were there. And what I realized doing North of 60 was that most people weren't. And that the idea of having your life represented in drama, that there were massive amount of people excluded from that. Mm-hmm. And North of 60 told stories where a whole different community could find their stories told in drama. And that enables you, it gives you license and often gives you a path through which you can work things out. It doesn't necessarily offer answers, but it does allow you to know that your story, mm-hmm. your emotions...
To be acknowledged.
Exactly.
Represented. To see your reflection.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And also that it resonates within you, that may enable you to maybe think a different way about your world.
Now, as you probably know, there's fan sites on Facebook, and people still talk about this show 20-plus years later. Are there any plans to bring the show back, say, for the 25th anniversary of when it first aired?
Look, we would love to explore something like that, and we are. It's very hard to know, whether something can fly after, it's a different world, but I think North of 60 is a show that can respond to this world and can respond. If we did have a chance to do it, we would do it differently. We are looking to have, when we're talking about it, Tina and I and Tom Cox are kicking around some ideas, and foremost among them would be to see if we could do a short run of the show, but written by Indigenous writers, directed by Indigenous directors.
Beautiful.
This generation is telling its own stories, and again, just give people the opportunity to get into mainstream television, and they fly.
Thank you so much, Barbara, for your time today.
Thank you, Roseanne. I appreciated being able to talk about the show. Now I'm going to sit around and cry for a bit.
I'm going to go watch some repeats.
Tell me where you find them.
Oh, I'll find them. Somewhere on some reserve, some kookum has recorded every episode on VHS tapes, I promise you.
Oh, that's lovely.
Barbara Samuels is one of the creators and writers behind the iconic show North of 60.
Hi, my name is Simon Baker. I was on North of 60. I was Charlie Muskrat for 3.5 years. And you're listening to Unreserved on CBC Radio 1 with my favorite cousin, Rosanna Deerchild.
The cast list reads like a who's who of the Indigenous entertainment community. North of 60 was responsible for launching and cementing the careers of actors and writers like Nathaniel Arcand, Michelle Thrush, Adam Beach, Richard Van Camp, Carol Greyeyes, Simon Baker, Carmen Moore, Ryan Black, Glenn Gould, and Lorne Cardinal. Jordan Wheeler was among the first and longest writers for the show. He is from the George Gordon First Nation in Saskatchewan. At the time, Jordan had written his first book, Brothers in Arms, a handful of fiction, a kid's book, and a short film. But North of 60 would be a game changer.
My name is Jordan Wheeler. I identify as Cree, even though I'm Cree, Anishinaabe, Assiniboine with some European stuff. On North of 60, Season 1, I was a writer intern. Seasons 2, 3, and 4, I was a story editor. And wound up, I think, with the last title I had was executive story editor. I got a phone call out of the blue. It was 1992. It was after Elijah Harper killed the Meech-Lick Accord. It was after Oka Summer. And politically, the producers knew that they needed an Indigenous writer in the story department. At the time, there were 5 Indigenous writers across the country who had written drama for prime time, all men. Thankfully, that's changed now. But there were 5 of us, and the script that I had previously written, the one script I had previously written, was closest in terms of tone and style to what the producers had in mind for what became North of 60. And soon after that, I was on a plane to Toronto for the first set of story meetings. I came on the show. They didn't have a title for the show. They didn't know where they were going to shoot it. The initial concept was to set the show in Inuit country way up north, but at the time, and it probably still, places like Iqaluit or Rankin Inlet didn't have the infrastructure to support a show of that size, so the concept was changed to Dene country in the Northwest Territories. I didn't really have any idea what I was getting into. What they offered me was an intern position. I was earning more doing what I was doing back home in Winnipeg than what they were offering, but the carrot that they dangled was if I showed I had the capacity, I might get a script in Season 1, and that was enough to hook me into it. And as it turned out, I showed them that I did, I guess, have the capacity to write television drama, and I wrote episode 11 in Season 1.
When was the last time you were out on the land?
Me? Last fall?
Weekends don't count, Peter.
I mean, really out on the land. Oh. When I was 10.
With Uncle Bernard?
Mm-hmm. He shot a moose, and I helped him dress it, pack it out.
He boiled the nose for you?
Yeah.
It's a delicacy.
Please.
So how long were you out there?
3 weeks. I was supposed to live with him, I guess if I'd lived with him, I never would have gone to residential school or university.
You should spend more time out on the land, though.
learn to love moose nose.
You never know when you get a show that goes to air. You never know if it's going to get an audience. You never know if it's going to go beyond one season. We didn't. I didn't. We all hope for the best. But we got the ratings from episode 1. I think it was 1.4 million people. And, for Canadian television, that's Hockey Night in Canada territory. I was with the show for the first 4 seasons. I left to move on to other projects. I had my high school diploma technically, but I never went to post-secondary. So I consider my 4 years at North of 60 as my university. Seeing your words come to life on set, being in the story room with creative minds and the synergy and the chemistry that developed, wonderful stories, working in that kind of environment, watching the actors blossom, having my kids part of the show. My 2 children, Kai and Cameron, played Leon and Rosie's children, Nisa Dela and Wayne Dela, along with a kid named Rocky. I can't remember his last name. When the auditions were happening, my son was the age that Wayne Dela's character was, and I asked the producers, Tom Cox, and if it was a good idea for my son to audition, and they said yeah, because I was involved with the show. It would help to make sure that he was available for the episodes, and so Cam auditioned and won the role. The little girl who played Nisa Dela initially, set can be an intimidating place and things are happening fast, and the first ADs are bossy and sometimes grouchy. And this little girl who was 4, poor little thing, got scared one day and just did not want to go in front of the camera. And they had to bribe her with a Barbie dollhouse. And they got the shot and then promptly fired her. And then they approached me because my daughter was the same age, and given that it was her real brother who would be playing her brother, they felt that she would be more comfortable on set. So I asked her mother, and she acquiesced, and that's how my daughter became part of the show.
I didn't say she was alive. I just said she was in a different place. That's what Joe says.
Depends on your religion. There's heaven, nirvana. If you're Hindu, you just keep being born again.
If you're Dene, you're in Yaket Nene.
Or your worm food.
That's also a possibility.
Just to have been part of that whole experience, it's 25 years now, and it's still been an indelible part of my life. And to hear how the audience responded, at the time North of 60 aired, there was one black box, recording ratings, what people are watching. There was one black box in the North and none in any Indigenous community across the country. In the Indigenous community, it was huge. They would not have bingos on Thursday nights or suspend the bingo while the show was on. Indigenous organizations, institutions, band offices, it was the talk around the water cooler every Friday morning. Did you see the show? People would just come out of the bush into communities. People that lived way out in the bush would migrate into town on Thursday nights to watch the show. It was, and we started to hear these stories well up after the episode started to air. So the real audience, the real scope and size of the audience was, I think, underestimated, particularly in the Indigenous community.
Jordan Wheeler is a Gemini award-winning writer who lives in Winnipeg. He wrote 4 seasons of North of 60.
We all know why it is we're here. Does anybody have anything to say?
I don't even know why we're having this meeting. I think we should boot his ass out. The guy's a maniac, okay? What he did is against the law. Wants to make trouble, he'll get trouble as far as I'm concerned.
You got something you want to say to everybody, Elsie?
I got a right to express my opinion.
You expressed it. Now sit down. I want to say, we don't know this man Olsen. We don't know who he is. He was catching the drug people in Vancouver. Bad people. So he comes here with his Vancouver head, and he finds my grandson looking like those drug people and acting like a stupid kid.
That's a scene from the first episode of North of 60, where it's established that TV Tanya is going to be the resident bad boy. In that scene, we heard Tom Jackson, Wilma Pelly, and of course my next guest, Dakota House. TV Tanya is a name synonymous with North of 60. He was the young, angry, rebellious teenager on the show, and it was a role that shot Dakota House to fame during the heyday of the show. But with instantaneous fame comes complications, especially as a young man. Dakota is now a grown man and has morphed into a healthy role model. Welcome, Dakota.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
So lovely to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, because I used to watch you on TV, right? So now it's like, here you are.
The character you love to hate, which everyone can relate to.
I'm feeling the feels, Dakota. Remind our listeners who your character was on the show.
Well, I, of course, play TV Tanya. If you ever seen the show, you would know me, as I always wore the studded leather jacket with tight blue jeans. And, he was always causing some kind of disturbance and raising some Cain in the community. So, he was, again, a character that you love to hate, and just an amazing development to the character over the years. But if you've ever seen North of 60, you would know the character for sure.
Yeah, he had quite an arc.
That's for sure.
During the duration of the show. You were just 18 years old when North of 60 first aired. Was that your first role?
No, actually, it was my third. I had done two MOWs prior to that, Diviners and Medicine River. Diviners, of course, was directed by Ann Wheeler, and Medicine River was directed by Stuart Margolin. And right after that, that's when I auditioned for this character named TV for a new show called North of 60. And lo and behold, bang.
You got it.
Yeah, all three shows. Those were my first three auditions, and I was able to land all three of them.
And of course, MOW stands for Movie of the Week.
That's correct, Movie of the Week. Yes.
So what was it about TV that attracted you?
I think, initially when I first read the character, I was like, oh my God, this sounds like me. TV is a character that everybody could relate to, and we all go through these trials and tribulations when we're young, dealing with life, especially in our teens. You know, it's so tough, and this much music day and age that we live in, it's hard for us to express ourselves in that way where people can understand. And TV, he expressed himself by expressing himself and causing all sorts of trouble. And when I first auditioned for the character, I was like, holy cow, wait a minute, okay, let me play a little bit of myself in here. And so that was the grabber for me, because being a character that everyone could relate to, including myself, and going through some of the things that I went through, like my audition for TV was he had lost somebody, and everyone in the world loses someone, and I just had to bring that up. And being able to play TV, I was just like, wow, what a classroom to be, on North of 60, working with like Tom Jackson and Tina Keeper,
everybody was on that show.
I could just go on and on. Yeah, so many.
So when you say that a lot of people related to that, particularly young people and teenagers, did you find that they were reaching out and saying, I know this guy, this is me?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there were times, and I could recall there was a couple of times. This one guy I walked by on the street, he had a leather jacket just like TV, studded all up, and I walked by him, and I turned over and looked over my shoulder, and this guy's jaw was on the ground, and he's like looking at me like, oh my God, I just passed a person who I so, and even people who I run into, they still today, there's so many fans out there. And they were like, your character was amazing. I always related to him, and he was such a disturber, and I couldn't wait to see what he was getting, what kind of trouble he was getting into next week. But
How overwhelming is it to have such a pivotal role, and such a role that people feel and relate to on such an iconic TV show?
I remember the first time I got asked for an autograph, and I was just I went into a store, and my buddy waited outside. And when I came outside, he was standing with this guy. He's like, "Hey, can I have your autograph?" And I'm like, "Get out of here!" I thought it was a joke, and he's like, "Honest to God, that guy came up and said, 'Hey, is that you?'" You know, in the '90s, I guess having that kind of, oh boy.
Fame,
hold,
that kind of fame.
I guess. Yeah, being on that pedestal. I mean, it definitely was. It was definitely overwhelming. I mean, living in a fishbowl, and you know, as the years went on, I just got used to it, and it's normal now. I mean, even when I'm with friends and people come up and they're like, "How do you handle that?" I'm like, I didn't even notice. Yeah, well, you signed an autograph, took a picture, and you never missed a beat. I was like, it's normal.
Now it's normal. Back then, as a young man, who yourself have said related to this character, you kind of your art reflected your life for a little while.
Well, sometimes I was looking over my shoulder, watching if the writers were watching me. So let's see what he gets into this weekend. We'll write about it for next. But
what kind of trouble were you getting into as Dakota?
Oh boy. Well, you know what? Nothing more than any kid, you know, at my age gets into. The only thing that was different was I was in this fishbowl. I was on a pedestal, and everything that I did was magnified 100 times. So yeah, I think I even read one time that I was Canada's bad boy, and I was like, holy cow, wow, really? Okay, cool, yeah.
Wow.
And being at that age, right? It's like, holy cow.
You were wearing it, you were like,
all right,
that's right.
Yeah, that's right. So I bought a Trans Am and had a Jaguar, and I'm like, yeah, I might as well play it right up.
Wow.
Yeah.
But then something happened that you have said became a real wake-up call for you. What happened?
Well, when I was, in my mid-20s, I was jumped in Edmonton, and I got beaten to an inch of my life by 6 guys, and had a near-death experience, and it really woke me up. I mean, today I look back and go, you know what? That was the Creator giving me a little bang on the head saying, wake up. And yeah, from that point on, I mean, life is so fragile, and you know, sometimes you don't get the scope of some of the things that are going on, and you know, it kind of takes you by both shoulders and gives you a ragdoll.
Gives you a ragdoll, indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I spent a month in intensive care and lost my hearing on my left side. Had to learn how to walk all over again because I lost my equilibrium. Yeah, it was a pretty traumatic experience. But, you know, I look at everything in life that we go through as knowledge and teachings, and I definitely learned a lot from everything that I've been through, and I'm able to use that today. And the last 12 years of my sobriety, I started an organization called Going Miles, and MILES is an acronym for Motivate, Inspire, Lead, Empower, Succeed. And I'm working with communities and our future leaders of today and tomorrow straight across the country. So sending a shout out to all you all coast to coast, my brothers and sisters from other mothers and misters, yeah.
Wow, that was like way cool factor there. Still, I'm such a nerd, I would never have been able to think up something so cool to say. Thank you so much, Dakota.
Well, thank you.
Dakota House played TV Tenya in North of 60. These days, he tours across Canada to motivate, inspire, lead, empower, and help our Indigenous youth succeed through his company, Going Miles. That's it for this week's episode of Unreserved. We'll be back in this radio space next week to bring you more community, culture, and conversation. Write us at unreserved@cbc.ca or find us on Facebook at CBC Radio Unreserved. This episode was produced by Kim Wheeler. Special thanks to Rebecca Efrat at CBC's Visual Resources. I'm your favorite cousin, Rosanna Deerchild, coming at you from Winnipeg in Treaty 1 territory. Thank you for listening to Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. Eko say.